standing by for the education briefing. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga is about to give more details on the department's plans. This as more grades are heading back to school tomorrow. Also making headlines, a Cape Town woman is calling on police to bring her justice after a night of partying goes wrong. But you can see visuals there of teachers getting ready to welcome back more grades to their schools as of tomorrow, once we hear, of course, from the Education Minister. Also, more medical personnel from the military are now in the Eastern Cape. Details of that coming up for you later. But my team also telling me that the Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga has just started to speak. Let's take you live to that briefing now.
MECs joining us from provinces. We will get to them at the right time. For now, I'm just going to ask the Minister to please take to the stage so that she can address us. And the rest of the proceedings will follow. Of course, we have two presentations which will come after the Minister. But we will inform you as to what will happen after the Minister has spoken. Minister.
No, thank you very much, Elijah. Let me also give my greetings to my colleagues from different provinces, DG officials, and members of the media. The last time we briefed the media, it was on the 7th of June 2020, just a week after schools reopened. And we requested all MECs to join us so that we have time for provinces to really speak about work in the respective provinces whilst we're preparing for the reopening of schools. And now we're here again, a month later, and MECs are here again with us to really update and brief the nation around the work that we've been doing for a month. And we can report that so much has taken place in the basic education sector. We have spent many hours and days in consultation with our strategic stakeholders, our partners within government, and really looking for solutions on how to proceed in this very difficult environment. We have sought and obtained advice from scientists, from medical and educational experts, which informs the decisions that we take on a daily basis within the education sector. At the last media briefing on the 7th of June, we did indicate that almost 97% of our schools were ready to receive learners on the 8th of June. And the technical report of the basic education sector, the external monitoring and evaluation report, which was from the research consortium led by the National Education Collaboration Trust, and the report from Rainwater, and also including, and most importantly, the reports that we got from our national school governing associations, and more important also from our national teachers organization, our principals, and also associations of people with special needs, of learners with special needs. So again, as CM, we met on the 2nd of July to consider reports which included the monitoring and evaluation report compiled by the National Education Collaboration Trust. And these reports, all of them, painted a clear picture of the basic education landscape, the strategic innovations that were introduced, the impact of the virus on schooling, as well as the impact on the benefits of the government that we had to introduce. At the outset, we wish to remind South Africans that there is currently no cure for COVID-19. All of us must simply follow the health, safety, and social distancing protocols from health, because if we fail to do so, the road ahead will be even most difficult. South Africans will recall that on the 29th of May 2020, we did publish directions in terms of Regulation 4.3, which were promulgated under the National Disaster Management Act of 2020, Act number 57 of 2002. Regarding the phase-in and reopening of schools and measures to address and prevent the combat the spreading of the coronavirus in the national education, basic education and provincial education for exemption from school attendance using Section 4 of the South African School Act, and the phasing in of the reopening of schools for learners with special education needs, as well as the opening of school hotels. The directives also made provisions around curriculum trimming, the reorganization of the school timetable, as well as the clarification of the national senior certificate examinations. And lastly, the alignment and issuing of permits and certificates for the regulations issued by the Department of Cogta. So on the 29th of June, as agreed with the Minister of Social Development, we deleted all reference to pre-grade R in the directions. Arising from the meeting of the Council for Education Ministers held on the 2nd of July, we further amended the directions in the manner I will state later. But what is important is to stress that the directions are intended to provide uniform processes and mechanisms to ensure compliance with the health, safety, and social distancing measures on COVID-19, as well as safeguarding the basic education system as a unified, democratic, and transparent system. The fact that South Africa, like all our countries of the world, are faced with a new normal brought on the nations of the world by COVID-19 pandemic, the basic education system has to continue to be implemented, monitored, and strengthened in compliance with the prescripts of the Constitution, as well as applicable legislation and national policies. The directions for basic education sector are definitely not intended to create unjustifiable deviations and exemptions from applicable law, but to streamline and strengthen the requisite compliance comparative. So on the effects of COVID-19 on schooling, we have to continuously remind South Africans that schools are a direct microcosm of society in which they are located. On a daily basis, we see an unprecedented rise in COVID-19 infections due to a number of factors, including non-compliance with the health, safety, social distancing protocols on COVID-19. What we see in our communities is mirrored also in our schools. Since our grade 7s and 12s returned to schools on the 8th, 968 of the 26,000 schools were closed and opened, which means 4% of our schools really had to close and open, which means that more than 25,000 of the schools, 25,000 of schools were not affected at all. So it is 4%, which is unfortunate, but the majority of schools remained very stable. Even though the 4% that was affected, indeed, we will say they lost 3 to 4 days in a week, so which means they would have enjoyed 4 weeks of teaching. Because it must be noted that the average during the deep cleaning or decontamination of the school or fumigation of the schools should at least take 3 days and not more. So again, since the return of the grade 7 and 12 learners on the 8th of June, 2,740 teachers of the total of the 440,000 teachers, meaning that less than 1% of our teachers, also of the entire population in our country, were affected by the virus. This implies that 0.0% of learners, also with learners, we had witnessed 1,260 learners reported to have been infected, meaning that less than 0.1% of our learners did get or were detected with the virus. So surprisingly, the highest number of infections, as I said, mirror the infection rates nationally. The majority of these infections were in the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and Gauteng. Even the report of the Consortium on Researchers confirmed that the majority of these infections amongst learners in schools, but also amongst teachers, were mainly in these 3 provinces, which also report high levels of infections in their provinces. And again, unfortunately, 11 teachers and 4 non-teaching staff also succumbed to the virus. And we're also told that there are 3 learners that also are reported to have passed away. But the reports show that some of these teachers and learners, unfortunately, could not even have the opportunity to report back to school when we reopen schools. And we want to say, as a sector, we convey our deepest condolences to the affected families, and we say, may their souls rest in peace. But due to the infection rates, it is clear that we need to continue to work together to contain the transmissions of the virus. As a basic education sector, we have to play our part together with the nation and all our stakeholders. On comorbidities, the return of principal teachers and non-teaching staff in schools also requires a risk assess process, and those teachers who, including those who are over 60, have a number of comorbidities. 10% of them, or 10,000 of them, have been permitted to work from home, meaning that 2.5% of our teachers have been given permission to work from home out of the more than 400,000 teachers that are employed by the state. So we are working with provinces to make sure that indeed we can engage them meaningfully and productively at home whilst we proceed to process other requests that may come our way. On water and sanitation, which was a major problem as we were planning to open schools, when we started the discussion on the reopening of schools, the provincial education departments did identify about 3,500 schools with water challenges. Unfortunately, a number of municipalities came on board as part of cooperation between the DBE, COGTA, SALGA, and water and sanitation. We must report that some schools had existing on-site storage tanks and just required assistance in filling them up. There were, however, several schools that did not have on-site storage tanks, and therefore Rand Water and DBE, in partnership with provinces, worked on additional on-site storage tanks and water supply. To date, we can report that an additional 2,175 tanks were delivered. In total, Rand Water assisted with the filling of water on site. The Defence Force also participated in the process, and again we had several water boards and municipalities that worked with us to ensure a sustainable water supply and appropriate sanitation in our schools. So in terms of sanitation, we can report that in the Eastern Cape, all 910 schools that were reported did receive their water tanks. In Limpopo, it was reported that 453 schools required water tanks, and these also have been served, though there were also challenges during the process of delivering of water. On school nutrition, we did give essential COVID-19 essentials such as masks, gloves, disposable aprons, as well as cleaning and sanitation materials that were provided to schools to feed initially the grade 7 and grade 12s. Now we have been working with our provinces to feed also learners who are not yet back in schools. Plans are in place to provide feeding to learners not yet in schools using different options, including staggered feeding at schools, cooked food that could be collected, but also parcels that are provided to learners. And because this program is ongoing and it's ongoing in different schools in different provinces, we humbly request that when parents send kids to come for school nutrition, they must come with face masks, or they must have their mouths and nose covered with cloth, so that the safety protocols are even kept during school feeding. Again, on home education, you will recall that we had said also parents who were anxious about sending their children to school were encouraged to do home education. So the parents who have decided to keep their children at home during the COVID-19 pandemic, and these parents are continuously advised to apply for provincial education, two provincial education departments for home learning in terms of Section 4 of the South African School Act. Again, we humbly request parents or advise them not to go to schools to apply for home education. They should rather approach provincial education departments for registration, because registration does not take place in schools for home education. On learner support interventions, we are still continue to be constrained by COVID-19 related challenges. We are still unable to have all learners returning to school at once. And to mitigate against the resultant challenges, we continue to provide support to learners at home with varieties of platforms, including radio, television, online, and of course in school. We have 127 sites that are zero rated and have good curriculum content that can be assessed whether one has data or not. And these interventions are part of our efforts to ensure unlimited access to content of learning during this time. And I really wish to convey our appreciation and sincere gratitude to the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies for the continued support in this regard. And the list of all these zero-rated materials are available on the DBE homepage, which is www.education.gov.za. The lessons that we have learned from COVID-19 must strategically be used as we move forward. We've agreed that we have to bring forward some of the strategic plans under development for quicker implementation. All of this should be done under our new term of office. So strategic plans on the improvement of school infrastructure is being facilitated so that plans are brought forward. On the other hand, we are also fast-tracking the rolling out of ICTs to be brought forward, and we can't proceed according to plan, but we have to make sure that we bring forward most of the plans around ICT and infrastructure. As South Africans, we have agreed that education being a societal matter, we expect or request committees also to participate in the process of keeping our children and our learners engaged and productively coordinated. On vandalism in schools, we had reported almost all provinces are currently doing repairs to 1,718 schools which were vandalized during the national lockdown. But what is disturbing, though, is that criminals still continue to cause havoc in our schools. In Gauteng, for instance, there were 351 schools that had been vandalized, and just this week, 6 schools also were vandalized. In Northwest, a school was torched this week, resulting in 3 classrooms being damaged. The province reports that tires were burned to set the school on fire. And this is a very serious setback to affected communities, which causes much damage to our infrastructure. But also have to say, we really are grateful and appreciative of communities that continue to support their schools and protect their schools. On orientation at schools around the new norm, orientation programs for principals, schools management teams, non-teaching staff and teachers have been developed and implemented. Grade 7 and grade 12 learners in turn were also orientated on the first day of their arrival at schools. Provinces are in the process of finalizing the preparations of the return of the second cohort of grades on the 6th of July and the 3rd of August. The new normal has created avenues for us to continuously engage with school principals for new strategies and approaches to curb the spread of the virus and to improve teaching and learning in our schools. As a result, we had to introduce differentiated timetables and the trimming of the curriculum. So when grade 7s and 12 learners returned to school on the 8th of June 2020, we did not have challenges related to spacing and school furniture. However, through our monitoring of schools, we have realized that many schools may have spacing challenges in the future once more grades return to school, but not now. Almost all schools are going to have to adopt innovative approaches with respect to timetabling and classroom management in order to ensure that all children can return to school while at the same time maintaining the necessary physical distancing measures that are required of us. Different options are being looked at, such as platooning, rotations of grades, and particularly on weeks, and other innovative approaches based on the different contexts, and they will be considered. Most provinces are inclined to rotational rather than platooning, But we are also painfully aware that a lot of school days have been lost and continue to be lost this year. For some grades more than others, many more days will be lost. We are therefore encouraged to note that the revised annual teaching plans have been developed and adapted by provinces and have been communicated to schools and teachers. In some cases, innovative approaches are being used, like training teachers using Microsoft Teams and other virtual approaches. As I said earlier, that we are forced now to bring forward most of the plans that we had around ICTs and also innovate more. But what I really want to emphasize today is that it is critically important that young people are kept constructively occupied, they are engaged and connected through schooling, because the young ones are the most, especially the most vulnerable, are faced by a number of social challenges, particularly violence, unplanned pregnancies, drug abuse, and many other social ills. And again, I want to repeat that it does take a village. It's just not a slogan, it's real. When we visited a school on Friday with the principal, of the 195 matric learners, 2 girls had not returned because they were pregnant. And one of the boys went missing, and it's an informal area, so that kid could not be, it's not that he's staying home because he's homeschooling. The risk is that he's dropping out of school. And those are the dangers that we're very worried about, that in the long term, in the long run, we're going to find ourselves with major social challenges that would have come from the pandemic. So it's important for us, all of us as a nation, to make sure that indeed we can continue to protect our children, we can continue to engage them, even if they're not at school, so that they're protected from themselves. Because the risk of them staying too long at home is ghastly to contemplate. On monitoring and evaluation of school readiness, a number of overall patterns continue to emerge from the monitoring and evaluation process carried out by DBE. Across most thematic areas in the tool, there were relatively high levels of readiness on average, with the lower levels recorded for psychosocial support. Because indeed, again, Chair, the pandemic and the lockdown has begun to be very depressing to people. In some schools, for instance, where they've been using both the Microsoft and are also teaching, teachers are reported to be exhausted and being burnt out from parallel systems. So there is a need for us as a sector to strengthen our work around psychosocial support, both for learners and teachers. Also, school nutrition had presented itself to be a problem. Personnel provisioning, because of distancing and remodeling and re-timetabling, did present a number of challenges, as well as high levels of readiness according to around facilities. And our biggest challenge has been about around water and sanitation and the compliance with COVID-19 protocols. The Director General continues to convene one-on-one meetings with heads of provincial departments to ensure that there is continuous sharing of experiences and working together. Also, as MECs, we meet at least once a week, again to share experiences and evaluate and assess the work that we're doing. So interestingly, there is concordance between the reports generated from these one-on-one meetings with provinces, but also from reports that we receive from the consortium led by the NECT, from your SGB school governing bodies, but also from the teacher associations that are represented nationally. Now, on Thursday, the 2nd of July, we met again with MECs and considered a number of variables which inter alia include the rising community infections across the country, especially in the 3 provinces, Gauteng, Western Cape, and the Eastern Cape, including KZN, and looked at the risk-adjusted, differentiated approach in dealing with the returning grades to school. And this is what made CEM to consider even staggering further the returning of grades, so that we don't return all the grades that we had gazetted that will be returned, that were meant to be returned tomorrow. So on the 3rd of August, we reconsidered the plans that we on the 2nd of July, we reconsidered our plans for the 6th of July and the plans for the 3rd of August. Firstly, CEM agreed that only grades 6 and 11 will return tomorrow, and provinces that are ready and institutions that are ready will then also phase in the ECD programs. Because there are some schools, especially your private independent institutions, which had already started getting ready for ECD programs and are very ready. And we have agreed that those will be allowed, but ECD centers in schools will be phased depending on the readiness of the school, but it has to be done within the gazetted timeframes. CM noted that provinces are at different levels of readiness to return grade R learners. Therefore, we agree that those provinces that are not ready to receive grade Rs tomorrow must provide strategic and realizable plans to ensure the reincorporation of grade R learners to school within and not later than the end of July. However, provinces that are ready to receive grade R learners tomorrow can proceed to receive these learners. But what is critically important is that all grade R and pre-grade R learners in schools who have already returned to schools must remain in schools. And those schools that meet the health, safety, and social distancing protocols can reopen for their grade R and pre-grade Rs tomorrow. We will continue to work with national associations responsible for learners with special needs to streamline the return of these learners to schools. A further agreement by CMs that all grades that are part of the second cohort should return to schools in an orderly, staggered fashion within the time frames that have been gazetted. Before I conclude, because indeed, when Cabinet gave us permission or approval to start reopening schools, the first condition was safety in schools and making sure that indeed we monitor the risk of having schools as centers where the virus will be spread. On the first issue, it should be emphasized that temporary closure of schools, which was less than 4% after the schools reopening, is much better, we think, than a system-wide closure over the same and even longer period of time. As I said, the 40% of the 25,000 schools, it means 25,000 schools remained open, they were never interrupted, and less than 1,000 schools were affected and had to open and close. Because if we would close all 100% of schools because of the 4%, it will come at a very unacceptable cost of lost learning and school feeding for an entire generation of children, with a consequent worsening of social and economic inequalities for years to come. It has not been possible yet to measure the impact of the current school closures on learning, since no significant assessment of learner performance has been done. However, international and local evidence around the typical impact of losing school time due to disasters like strikes suggests strongly that learning losses may well be greater than what is suggested by actual days lost. This so, in a large part, system disruptions result in learners forgetting some of what they've been taught, and teachers being forced to go even days or areas back in order to enable learners to catch up. So one of the forthcoming surveys of households across South Africa on the coronavirus rapid mobile survey is busy collecting information on childcare activities, on child hunger and access to educational content when children are being kept at home. So preliminary yet unpublished results from the first wave of data collection indicate an alarming increase in child hunger since the national lockdown. The survey is also suggesting that a significant increase in childcare responsibilities has increased the burden on women. The survey also confirms that less than a third of children that have not been attending to school have not accessed any education through the internet, with a larger proportion of them accessing education through books, through television and radio. However, the effectiveness of these two activities continues to be uncertain and are likely to be less effective than attending school. But what the survey confirms is the usefulness of books and printed materials. That's why we want, again, communities and families to make sure that children are kept or are engaged constructively during the lockdown through books and through different activities that will keep them stimulated, so that as they stay longer at home, they really don't suffer longer consequences of lack of stimulation. So from the planning side, we will be convening a DBE discussion on the findings of this survey to continue to monitor what the impacts are of a continued lockdown or the continued virus lockdown, enforced lockdown on the lives of children. There's a report also, because as I say, we had to monitor what the infections and what are the risks that are brought by the reopening of schools to teachers and learners, because that was a condition that we were given when we had to open schools. So we have to monitor and report on that. So unfortunately, we must honestly say we currently do not have any data or dates of infection as confirmed by the number of cases of virus amongst teachers and learners. That's why when we mention the statistics of teachers who have already passed on and learners, and it was confirmed that the majority of them would not have even reported in schools by the time they succumbed to the virus. But what we are currently doing is to put in place mechanisms and also be very vigilant to make sure that there is no risk or instance where schools themselves become epicenters for the spread of virus, because that was one of the conditions that were given to us, and therefore had to monitor it. So what we are committing to is that indeed in the next round also of reporting, we assume that we will have, or we commit that we will collect as much evidence that will confirm that indeed schools have been centers of the spread, or schools have been the risk of spreading the virus amongst children and amongst adults. So we will give the results in days to come, but for now we don't have any evidence that confirms to the fact that schools have become risk factors. But as I say, we're very careful to make sure that indeed we can overcome that or we can avoid that, and that's why even the staggering of classes, just to make sure that we don't really take any chances or really risk schools being centers of the infection. So in conclusion, I really want to appeal that unity among stakeholders has been phenomenal, and we're very grateful and appreciative for that. Parents have been very helpful. Teacher organizations also have been very helpful in terms of giving us information, guiding, and making sure that we are all as a sector constructively and honestly engaged, so that we don't make any mistakes, because it's not in the interest of anyone to harm anyone within our sector. So we have a lot, we still believe that we have a lot of work to do still. The virus is still with us, and unfortunately the infection rates are increasing, and we are told that it's going to continue to remain with us for some time, but we believe that through collaborative efforts we can overcome and we can be able to work together. So we do appeal to each and one of us to cooperate with the sector and with the education to ensure that we put the interests of our children and of our educators, including our parents, as a top priority on our list. So I really want to thank you very much, Chair, and thank again the public and the committee for all the support that we enjoyed during the month of June.